Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special evening. Not only is it an absolute honor to have Professor Weitzner with us, but we're also honored with his busy schedule, being that just this week, his new book came out called Capitalism, and I've had the opportunity to read it. It's fantastic, and I'm really excited tonight that we're going to be able to have this conversation. So before we get started, I just want to introduce you to David. He is obviously a doctor, a professor of strategy and ethics at York University in Toronto. He's the author of this brand new book, Connected Capitalism, How Jewish Wisdom Can Transform Work. I've also read his book called 15 Paths, How to Tune Out the Noise, Turn on Imagination and Find Wisdom. David's research focuses on the intersection of business ethics, strategy, and stakeholder theory. His writing has been featured in top academic journals, including the Academy of Management Review, Organization Studies, and the Journal of Business Ethics, as well as popular media outlets as diverse as Tablet Magazine, The Forward, and Chabad.org. He's also presented at a host of international conferences. He lives in Toronto with his wife and 3 kids. Professor Weitzner, it's an honor to have you here tonight. Welcome.
Wow, Rabbi Yisroel, I'm sad that I don't live in Montreal. To get your energy on a weekly basis would just be unbelievable.
And I was just thinking that really I have your hair. The only problem is it came down to my chin.
Yeah, you know, it happens.
So we have that. Look, people, anyone who has long hair understands long hair issues and bad hair. You say maybe I have bad hair days. I have bad beard days. It always works like that. Yeah. But now on to our topic at hand. I was amazed when I read your book. I thought there were so many incredible ideas that you put forth. And for me, the most incredible idea is that I've spoken to so many people who have had a problem over the years with religion, with spirituality, with Judaism, since this is the topic of our conversation, and work, and trying to see that one are the same. And you bring about something that's so incredible, this incredible idea that you can infuse spirituality into what you do, even professionally. So I want to talk about that for a minute.
Sure. I mean, it's not only you can, I would argue that you must. You know, what I've come to realize after being in the business professorial game for 20 years now is that it's a must. And the reason it's a must, I think, is because what has been able to penetrate in the management thinking world is the notion that ethics matter. But ethics isn't enough. When you think about ethics, ethics is about altruism. Ethics is about being kind, charity, you know, those sort of ideas, or not being evil is an ethical principle. But it's not enough. You know, we want more. And spirituality gives you that more. Spirituality in the book, I define as having 3 pillars: meaning, connection, and wonder. And you need all 3 of them. You know, you need to pursue meaning. You need to be involved with other people. You need to have deep, powerful connections. And you need moments of wonder, these moments where you're like, whoa, the world doesn't make sense anymore. You know, that's where learning and growth happens. And that's a spiritual experience. And I think people sometimes have an instinctive reaction to push back when they hear about religion in the workplace, because they think about either rules or power and control. And they sometimes push back when they think about spirituality because they think it's sort of the flaky, metaphysical, not of this earth topic. And I believe both of those suppositions are incorrect. Bringing spirituality is a rejection of power, and bringing spirituality is a rejection of necessarily going the metaphysical route. It doesn't have to be metaphysical.
It makes a lot of sense to me. And I do want to come back to this because I know it's the core principle of your book of meaning, connection, and wonder. I want to come back to this. But what's interesting to me as a rabbi is, what do you think Jewish values can contribute to this conversation?
So, you know, I tell the story in the book, but I'll bring it out here too. I'm going to give you a comparison, right? So recently, the Dalai Lama, who represents a beautiful spiritual tradition, it's a spiritual tradition I have immense respect for. I've been a meditation practitioner for longer than I've been a business professor. And he was asked, what do we do in the COVID situation? What's the spiritual response to COVID? And the Dalai Lama said something that's somewhat sensible and wholly consistent with his philosophy. He said, if there's something to do it without worry. And if there isn't anything to do, don't worry about it. And I thought, okay, that's nice, but is that really going to help me or motivate me if I'm a researcher to work harder to try and find the vaccine? Is it going to motivate me if I'm a politician thinking about health policy? Will that help me get there? If I'm a business struggling to tell me not to worry, it's not really going to help me. So it's a beautiful tradition and there's a space for it, but we need something different. And what I think the Jewish tradition brings is this notion of reactivity, that spirituality isn't something you are. It's not a state of being. It's an action, first and foremost. It's actions that you take. You react, you do something. And the story that I share in the book is, to me, a defining moment in the Torah, in the Jewish Torah, which is often underexplored, is the story of Moshe and the rock. When the Jewish people were in the desert, they needed water. And God said to Moshe, go and speak to the rock. But the people were impatient. So Moshe said, you know what, forget it. And he hit the rock and he took action. And I know I'm playing to a Lubavitch room tonight, so I'll say that it's actually the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe that gave the reading that inspired me, where he said, don't misunderstand what this is about. He said, this was Moshe realizing it's not about water, it's not about thirst. It's a deeper message about the search for meaning and knowledge. And the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe said that Moshe's realization is, if it comes from speaking to the rock, that's a message to the Jews and to future generations that things can come easy. You schmooze, you talk, things will happen. Hitting the rock was to say you got to work to find the good. If you want deep meaning, it's going to take effort. And so we have this idea then that spirituality is born of reaction, of effort. Now, here's the key. Here's the key. When you hear the word reaction, you sometimes think of like a childish tantrum, right? Reaction can be out of control. But in the Jewish tradition, they say to couple that, there are relationships. If you're on your own reacting, you're right, you can go off the rails. But if you build communities, if you recognize that the key idea is the relational standpoint, that you have people who are your chavrusas, your learning partner, you have people who are your Rabbi, you have people that are your parents, your family, they'll help keep you in line. And so there's that combination of saying spirituality means take chances, do things, change the world. But when you're out in the world, you're not out alone. You got to be tied with other folks. And I think that's what Judaism brings to the table in opposition to some other spiritual traditions.
It's fascinating. And it's funny because I've always wondered about that story of Moses hitting the rock. I think, first of all, that God punished him severely for a very minute action. And I understand that because I think that leaders are spoken to a higher standard. And there's something about that. So I want to go back to this idea of meaning and connection and wonder, which is really these three pillars that you speak about. Can you define them for us first? Because a lot of us haven't had an opportunity to read the book yet. And also I want you to define them specifically having to do with our society, our world. I'm going to call it the post-COVID world. What does it mean to us? I want something practical out of this conversation. Okay,
sure. So let's look at meaning. Let's start there, right? We all know what that word means. It's I'm using the word to define the word, right? But the idea of meaning is that there's a higher principle that guides our behavior. Meaning says, I'm not just going out into the world to feed myself, to find housing. I'm going out in the world because I want to construct a story, a narrative of my life. And meaning is those pieces that help you construct your life's narrative, that give you a sense of purpose and some higher understanding. And again, let's think about where we've been finding meaning during the COVID era. So for many of us, we've been passive. We've been retreating because we haven't been able to connect with other people. We haven't been able to go outside of our homes. And so for many of us, meaning came from looking inward, from breathing and waiting for all of this to pass. Well, for the post-COVID world, we're going to need the opposite of that. To get out of COVID, meaning will once again come from getting out into the world, getting out with people, and building a new world, because sadly, COVID has ravaged the economy. It's made us question government. It's made us question many of our existing institutions, the way we address poor people, the way we address racial issues. They've all come to light as being newly recognized or more universally recognized as problematic. And so now when we go out in the post-COVID world to construct our narrative, it's going to be different than the narrative we had before COVID, I think, and I hope. And so connection is that next stage, right? So if we're going out in the world to make changes, if we're going to be reactive, then we know we need to connect with other people. And connection, I think, is really powerful. You know, in the book, I say that we need friendship to be a work resource, that we shouldn't be afraid of saying connection in a deeper sense. Connection, not just in an instrumental sense. I'm connected to you because you pay me. I'm connected to you because you can do something for me. But in a meaningful sense that says, no, we're friends. You know, I'm going to take risks for you. I'm going to trust you. I'm going to go beyond for you. And then through all that, we come to wonder. And wonder, as I said earlier, is those moments that challenge our paradigm, when we're silenced, when we're going on that hunt for meaning, when we're constructing our narrative, and we reach out to folks who we might not have thought would be helpful. And we learn something from them, and we're struck, and we stop, and we say, whoa, the world doesn't make sense, or this is new, or this is different. I'm going to pause. Here's the moment to breathe, by the way, right? In your moments of wonder, meditation's perfect. When you're broken and your paradigm is challenged, breathe, pause. And then afterwards, it's an iterative process. Get back out in the search for meaning. Be amazed, be silent, be in awe, and then be inspired once your paradigm starts to take shape again to search for further meaning and new connections. And that's life. That's the journey of life.
I think it's beautiful, but at the end of the day, there's people that are struggling. We're in a very, very difficult. I mean, there's people who can start talking doomsday, and I've heard it all at this point. What do you say practically for those people? How do you try to infuse that kind of meaning, or maybe thinking more of that wonder into our day-to-day? Like, what practical advice do you have for us?
So I think that answer is going to vary to the individual. So I don't want to speak in general terms for too long, because I think those are good questions, but I think we want to be context specific. But I'll give you an answer for one sort of person, right? If you're a manager and your paradigm has always been that I go to work to keep an eye on the folks below me, and my job in the day-to-day is literally to manage human beings, to corral them, to steer them. That's not the right approach in the post-COVID world. In the post-COVID world, I say, you got to give up on management and embrace a paradigm of co-creation. And co-creation means everyone in my organization, from the top to the bottom, is a partner in some way. They're contributing in a way that makes them think and feel like they matter. And that's a meaning, connection, and wonder piece. And so the individual at the bottom of the hierarchy, they may not have the power to demand that right now, but I would encourage them to feel strong enough to demand it. And if they're not getting it, to go somewhere else, because that's the future of management. I truly, as a strat, forget the spiritual stuff, forget the religious stuff. As a hardcore business strategist, I do not believe that businesses that still embrace a paradigm of command and control will survive in the long term, with the exception of a behemoth like Amazon. Okay, Amazon's untouchable and they're not an insubstantial part of the economy, fine. But the vast majority of firms that aren't Amazon will not be able to be exploitive like that anymore. Why? Because A, people will be empowered to reject it. Cities will be empowered to reject them. And folks will start demanding more, and more value will be created in those spaces that are co-creative. So in the near term, if you're feeling hopeless, let's speak to those folks. In the near term, if you're feeling hopeless, if your job is killing your soul, it's not easy advice to say, quit, find another job. You can't necessarily do that, right? But you can look within your, as they say in Judaism, your Dalet Amas, or in strategy, we talk about the 8%. 8% is your Dalet Amas, so it's 8 instead of 4, right? So in Judaism, we talk about 4 hand breaths, right? And in strategy, we say 92% of what you encounter in your day-to-day, you can't change, can't affect. You have a small window of 8%. But within that 8%, the effect that you can have, the thing that you can set in motion from your small piece is massive. And the examples we talk about, and this what connects to connection and to wonder, are things like, and maybe we'll talk about this more later, making eye contact with folks, smiling at the person. I mean, little cheesy things, right? Make the world of difference.
They're not little cheesy things. They're incredible things. Just the ability that we have, look, I mean, just the fact that we can look at each other even through a screen right now, that's a very powerful experience. And we're able to be safe on a COVID level, and we're able to have that kind of social interaction. That's incredible. That's not cheesy.
Yeah.
There are so many questions coming in. I'm gonna kind of intersplice the questions into our conversation because I think they're really pertinent. So my friend, Dr. Cheryl Beller-Kenner just asked, how can we rebuild communities so that the given environment is psychologically safe for people to take risks, to move beyond their fear and open their hearts, and I have to say big hearts like Cheryl's, to connect authentically?
So, Cheryl, thank you for that question. It's the Nobel Prize question. So I'm not going to give you a good answer, right? Because if it were easy, everyone would be doing it, okay? But I can say a few things, right? One of the things that I can say is that why aren't folks doing that? In other words, why are there communities that make people not feel safe, not feel comfortable with risk, right? What is their defense of that? And we know the laundry list. It's power, it's control, it's fear of inefficiency, And so I'll give you I'll tell you, we're in a Jewish night, so let's stick with the Jewish advice rather than the theoretical advice. So Rabbi Steinsaltz said something beautiful on this topic, right? Rabbi Steinsaltz said, in order to be innovative, you have to be able to play. And playing means, by definition, you're wasting time, you're wasting money, you're being inefficient. But only when you do that will you come up with something amazing. In the strategy world, we say the same thing. Now, does that mean your boss, your manager, your CEO tomorrow will say, okay, Steinsaltz said it, Harvard business prof said it, go for it? No, right? It's going to take time, but feel happy and comfortable and empowered knowing that more people are embracing that logic than ever before. It is a type of thinking that is being taught in Harvard and that the top consulting firms are now pushing. Change is slow, but there's hope, And again, I think COVID, there's nothing good about COVID, but perhaps a positive outcome maybe will be that COVID may accelerate this, because after 2 years for some of us of not being together, I think it's a lot harder to go back to a space and make people feel unsafe again. If you're going to get people to leave their homes after COVID, after being masked and Zoomed and scared of the world, you better be offering a space where they feel empowered to play and co-create and innovate and build relationships, or or they're staying home. So it's not easy, but I'm hopeful that more and more leaders will recognize that, I'll give you another line that's helpful from the strategy world. We used to view leadership as a character trait. So this type of person is or isn't a leader. And that's it's an unhelpful construct. It's better to view leadership as a description of a type of relationship. So it's not I'm the leader and you're the follower. It's that we're in a relationship where we have to go back and forth on leading. and it's transactional. Because if the people the leader tries to lead aren't into it, if they're pushing back, that person's not going to lead. You know, when I started, you know, my strategy journey, I like to joke that there's no world where I'll ever be successful as a CEO. And this is why I have to stay in academia, because research shows what's the number one trait that all successful CEOs share. They're over 6 feet tall and broad-shouldered. New? I don't have that, right? And why was that so important? Because research showed that both men and women feel safe when someone's tall and broad-shouldered. So he said leadership is a trait because only certain bodies have what it takes to lead. And now he's saying, no. Leadership's a relationship and it's iterative. And those who are being led are as intrinsic to the process as those who are leading.
Amazing, you know, being led, taking risks. You and I had a conversation yesterday on Clubhouse, and I was not planning on bringing it up, but I was fascinated by this conversation. And the conversation, in a nutshell, was about the role of fear, or we called it awe, or I think you called it wonder, in Jewish life, in our own lives. So there's so many people who are living, and you were just saying this before, that's why it kind of struck, and I said, we got to talk about this, that people are living in excessive fear. So how do we shake that off for this, and in the words of Cheryl, this post-pandemic rebuilding? How do we rebuild our communities if we're living in fear?
So, you know, it's funny. I'm gonna be a jerk right now, Rabbi Yisroel, and I'm gonna say I want you to talk right now more than me, and I'll tell you why. Because this is an amazing conversation. Those of you who were part of it, actually, I think Yair, who started it, is actually here.
Yeah, he's here.
It was just, yeah, it was an amazing conversation. And the root of the conversation was this role of yira, right? That's the Hebrew word. And we were like, how do we define it? Because do we define it as fear, which has a contemporary sense of being something undesirable, aversive, right? If I'm afraid of something, I'm afraid because they're going to hurt me, because they're going to punish me. Or do we define it instead under awe, right? Which is an extension of wonder, because wonder is sort of like, wow, that's great. Awe is a more humbling sense, right? Awe can still make you silent, and it teases this year idea, and it may be fear, but it's fear in a normative sense. It's fear not because you're going to hurt me. It's not fear because you're going to punish me. It's not an instrumental fear. It's not a coercive fear. It's a fear in symbol. It says you stand for something that makes me whoa, right? And the reason I'm going to be a jerk and push it to you is because we had a number of brilliant Rabbanim and interesting thinkers in the room, and many of them were doubling down on fear. And Rabbi Yisroel said, you know what? Fear is not part of my practice. I want you to talk more about that. Yes, you did.
I have a very difficult time looking at my relationship with spirituality or my relationship with God from a fear-based. I'm not inspired by fear. Actually, it's not only not inspiring to me, it's the opposite of inspiring to me. Because if I can't have a loving relationship with a higher power, then I don't see the value in having that. I mean, I don't, you know, I think about other relationships in my life. I don't do things for others because I'm afraid. I don't even do things for others out of awe. I do things out of love. So why would that be any difference with my relationship with God?
Yeah. And I would transpose that answer, as we've said at the beginning of this talk, to the business world, to the social world, to the political world. Because in our minds, the brilliance of Judaism is that there is no line between your work world and your worship world and your synagogue world and your school world. It's all the same. And so if you say, I approach my relationship with God through love, then you approach your relationship to family through love, then you approach your relationship to business through love. And that's a beautiful and powerful thing. And by the way, again, I hope you folks read the book, because in the book, we speak to folks who aren't even Jewish, who have embraced that concept. You know, there's a wide recognition right now that the business sphere needs more of that. And by the way, not for altruistic reasons, right? For selfish reasons, because we're better when we feel safe, because we innovate more when we feel safe, because when we trust each other, we can actually be more demanding of each other, right? It's hard to be demanding of somebody when they're afraid of you, because they'll do it, but they'll do it because, oh my God, I'm being watched. Oh, I'm scared. Oh, you're going to fire me. So they'll do it, but they'll want to find another job. They'll want to be somewhere else. On the other hand, if they know you love them, well, again, not in a romantic sense, not in an uncomfortable sense, in a spiritual sense, in a sense that builds trust, that I can trust you, then when you push me, I'm going to respond happily, in my own life, right? It's sort of funny that I ended up doing a lot of research with one particular individual, this Israeli individual at my school. And he made the joke the other day, although it's not a joke. He said, he realizes the reason we work so well together, at least from his side, is because he said, as an Israeli, he doesn't understand North American norms. And so he's rude and he's a jerk and he's critical and he's harsh and it's aversive to a lot of people. But to me, because I know we love each other, I thrive in that, right? So I know when I send him a draft of my work, he's going to tear into it and it's beautiful and I do better. But if it was someone I didn't love, I'd be offended by that reaction. I'd be uncomfortable. If it was someone I feared, I would be timid and maybe too kowtowed to push back and offer something better. And so there really needs to be a space for love in the business world. And one of the folks who I interviewed is this brilliant artist who lives in Toronto. His name is Ronnie Burkett. He's a puppeteer, brilliant. If you have a chance to see his show post-COVID, you must. Brilliant guy. And what he said to me was amazing because, his show was mind-blowing. So in his last show, he gave out 100 puppets. And the puppet show was performed by everyone. We were in an open warehouse space and everyone had a role. And I said to him, how the heck did you do that? The audience were uptight doctors and lawyers. They weren't theater people. How did you get 100 people to do that? And he said, it all starts with the ritual at the start of the show where I hand people the puppet and I look them in the eye. And when I look them in the eye, they feel that for the duration of the show, I love you and I trust you. Don't worry, when the show's over, I'm not gonna be waiting at the door for you to take me out to dinner. I'm not gonna be showing up at your house. Don't worry, I know it's just 3 hours. But for the next 3 hours, look at me. I love you, I trust you. Here's the puppet, don't screw up. And it worked, It's an amazing thing to see. So here he is bringing love into a theater space to get people with stage fright to work and do amazing things.
That is an amazing story. I want to transfer that into something that I've seen as a rabbi through this COVID period. And that is, for so many years, at least for me as a rabbi, I felt like people expected me and so many other religious leaders to provide their spiritual experience for them. Where is Judaism? It's in the synagogue. Where are you having that experience? You can have a problem, you have to call the rabbi. Where something's happened incredibly during this COVID period, where people have to do it themselves. The synagogue wasn't there for them. And so it's required people to try to figure out their own spiritual practice, their own religious practice. I mean, what are the questions that were coming up before Passover? What are the best ways for me to create a meaningful experience for my family at the Seder? I never got these kinds of questions before.
Right.
Because, at least in my community, many people actually spent Passover Seder with us and expected me to provide that for them.
Right.
And so I see exactly what you're saying really coming out into our world where I am the author of my life. That's a very powerful statement that people are making in their actions, even more than the words.
Right. I don't want to get too businessy, right? I know it's a general crowd, so I'm afraid to get too businessy, but I think it's salient. The current academic work I'm doing is recognizing that we're about to enter a different era of business. Why? because the dominant companies now are platforms. They're not brick and mortar firms. They're not warehouse-based. They're platforms, right? So think of Amazon and Google and Facebook. They're platforms. What's unique about a platform? A platform is their whole business model is built on the unknown unknowns, right? So a platform is, I'm putting this out there, right? Apple puts it out there, Google puts it out there. And then programmers who they don't know who they are, go and develop apps that they didn't anticipate in ways that they don't anticipate for users that they don't know about. And their whole future is based on the success of unknown unknowns. So what kind of strategy can I offer someone like that, right? How is it different from the old school strategy? The difference is, it used to be, you have power, who you have power over, and so you manage those relationships. So you have power, you have urgency, you have legitimacy. There's ways to manage it, but you know who you're managing. Now you don't know anymore. So it goes inwards, right? All the strategic advice is now, you got to figure out, Google, who you are and what you want to project. You got to figure out who you are, Apple, and what you want to project, because you don't know who your partners are, and you don't know who your customers are going to be, and you don't know what they're going to do, and you don't know what the world's going to look like in a few years. And that's that same idea. It's a radical, crazy idea that we're entering an era where it's actually every individual has the chance to engage in co-creation, because everything's up for grabs. We're so disruptive. We're so uncertain. Everything is so different that the power is shifting in a meaningful way. Like, yes, we still have government, and yes, there's still a, rich poor dichotomy. Yeah. There's still those problems, true. But let's not undersell the opportunities here.
It's amazing. It's amazing. And I'm just thinking about this idea of being able to co-create. And I know you bring that out in your book. Just, you use this idea of chavruta. I love that, where, using chavruta in this way of co-creation. How do you see the average person being able to create this kind of co-creative experience in their own lives? If I just were to ask you, just in a few words.
It literally, I believe that chavrusa is a model. It's a step-by-step model that we can use. And, you don't have to listen to me. If you live in Toronto, go sneak by the Lubavitch Cheder and just peek in the window and take a snapshot of what you see. Okay? If you just looked in the window, what do you see? You see pairs. You see them face to face, right? They're making eye contact. They're in front of each other. You see they have a book open that they're sharing. So they're both working out of the same source material. And you see that one person's talking and one person's really listening. And then at some point, that person's going to start talking and the other's going to keep listening. So it's not a rabbi-student relationship. It's equals, right? And the final thing you'll see is it's going to get passionate, and it's going to get, their hands will be moving, right? But then you're going to see they're going to walk away together and go pray or eat or hang out or whatever it is. So what is it, right? What's this? What's the heart of it? Anyone can do this. Eye contact, share text, or share project. Listen as closely as you speak. Push back with comfort and love that person. Make sure that project. Make sure when you leave the table, you're leaving together. That's co-creation. And that's a paradigm that we can use anywhere.
That's brilliant. I'm going to get to your question, so please continue to put questions in the chat box. I want to show you something, David. So in the beginning of tonight's class, we asked a question. In one or two words, what advice do you have for life after COVID? And all these answers came from our participants. Now, in this word cloud, obviously, you'll notice some words bigger than others. Those are words that many people chose. So the more people that chose it, the bigger the word that came out. What do you take from this co-create? This, I believe, is not chavruta, but it's a co-creative exercise. What do you see here? What do you take out of this?
I love it. I love the fact that patience dominates.
Yes.
I love the fact that, that's where we have consensus, because you see some people are in a dark space. I see grief. Some people are in a moderate space. I see balance, right? Some people are in a more loving space. I see family. So I see, the spectrum there. But patience is central. And indeed, patience speaks to each of that. What's interesting though, where I'll push back to our audience and make them think, is patience where, right?
Yeah.
Patience where? Because should we have patience with our family and those that we love? Absolutely, extra patience. Should we have patience with a government that's proving to be somewhat useless? Nah. Should we have patience with a boss that's pushing us extra hard and not being compassionate during our struggles? Nah. You know? So I think I like your second one, the second most popular one, which is, yes, I see Debbie, right, patience with oneself. Yes, that's perhaps most important. Understanding. I think that's a key partner to patience, because I think we should be patient with those who are understanding.
Yeah.
And those who are not understanding, no patience. Travel, dude, that speaks to my heart. Enjoy.
Hasn't happened for me in a while.
Beautiful.
Yeah. This is amazing.
Let's see, what else do we have here? Do I have anything that I would disagree with? Muna, obviously, faith, beautiful, motivation, think, reconnect with the heart.
Evaluate, slow down, live free.
Speed up. Don't slow down. Don't slow down. Do
empathy.
Different.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a beautiful list. And I hope, and let's keep it up for a minute, because I hope that we see that there's nothing on this chart that I wouldn't rank as connected to spirituality. Travel can be spiritual, can be a spiritual journey.
That's interesting.
Evaluation can be spiritual, you know?
So
sorry, go ahead.
Can you lean into that a little more? Because that's interesting. Again, you know, I have to, and I think so many of us have to reprogram ourselves to think of these as spiritual things, because I don't see them natively spiritual.
So let's go with the obvious ones, right? So, you know, compassion would be spiritual. That makes sense. Let go is spiritual. That makes sense, right? Think. Sometimes we think that thinking is antithetical to spirituality, because we think that thinking is of the rational and spiritual is of the supra-rational. And I disagree, you know, and I think if there's doctors in the room, you know, correct me, because I'm not a medical expert, but my limited understanding of neuroscience has shown that we now have come to a place to recognize that we know nothing about the brain, and that our prior division of left brain, right brain is just not true. And in fact, everything we do is thinking, right? So what we call an emotional reaction is actually thinking. What we call a spiritual reaction is thinking. So it might not be native to us, but expand your paradigm and know that that's spiritual. Family, again, folks will recognize that as spiritual. Where's something else that people might not recognize as spiritual? Courage is a spiritual trait. To go on the spiritual journey, any tradition, by the way, requires bravery. Let me speak to the point that was just flashed on the screen before from the chat. To forgive yourself requires courage. And the courage is a spiritual type of courage. So I see nothing here that, forget even antithetical to spirituality, that's not key to meaning, connection, and wonder, and the journey of getting there. You're muted, Rabbi Yisroel.
I'm going to take this off the screen now. I want to get back to this wonder, because I think wonder is one of your Torahs. It's one of your unique contributions to this, and really unique idea. Can you explain, how do you get to that wonder?
It varies for people. You know, I landed on wonder and the importance of wonder after I did my last book, because my last book, it originally was supposed to have a different title. It was originally supposed to be called Finding Hope in Dissonance. And that title didn't fly with the marketing folks. And so we dropped it to the more acceptable 15 paths. But the reason I wanted to call it Finding Hope in Dissonance is because that's what summarized my journey. My journey in the last book was, I was a very disillusioned business professor. I was not being inspired by my colleagues, and I needed to feel something again. And so I reached out to my artistic heroes. I reached out to folks like Lee Ronaldo of Sonic Youth, Nels Klein of Wilco, and some other really amazing folks. You can check out that book. And
I believe one of them is here with us, Rabbi Tzvi Freeman, who's here with
Rabbi
us
Tzvi
tonight.
Freeman made the book too. He's one of my 14 heroes.
Yes,
He's an amazing
I read
individual
that
who,
part.
by the way, is a musician, right? So this is the chop, right? And so the chop was that for me, wonder came when I'm watching live music be created. That was wonder. That's when I felt it. I felt wonder these people do their thing. And so I wanted to intellectualize it and rationalize it and try to end as best I could. And it didn't work, right? I had to turn off my analytical mind and just be to feel that wonder. And that was the essence of it, of that silence. And, it's interesting. We did an event in New York and someone asked Nels about wonder. And Nels said, wonder used to be what happens when folks would go to church. They would get together and they would sing as a community. And in that singing, they felt that wonder because they didn't want to analyze it. They didn't want to talk about it. It wasn't about words, right? It was just being that moment of either you were silent or you were in that song. In our tradition, we have it via the tish and the niggin. We have it in our shuls. Which is similar to the Christian tradition.
Favouring.
But we also have it outside the shul, the niggin. That's right. What I love about our tradition is we have it whenever folks get together around any table. You find a table, pour a little booze, get some folks together, and we have it. That niggin can bring us to that side. It could be two people that bring us there. There's a story that we were talking about earlier, Rabbi Yisroel, but I think it's important to share. My wonder moment in my youth was with a great chassid and professor, Dr. Block, amazing individual, right? And I was young. I was an undergrad. So I thought I was smarter than I am now. Now I realize a little less smart, right? And I would always argue with Dr. Block because I was not a Lubavitcher. And yeah, Dr. Block, that's right. Amazing individual. And they were wonderful. We'd have these arguments for years, back and forth, in class, out of class, intellectually, what's right? And then one day he invites me over for a tish. And we're just sitting and we're singing and we're drinking. And I start to ask him the question again. And he looks at me straight in the eye contact, right? It all comes together. Looks at me in the eye. He said, David, you will never know the joy I feel from being a chassid of the Rabbi. And he had another shot, slammed the drink on the table, and that was it. And I was like, whoa, right? He got me. He was my professor. Nothing he said from the lecture hall came close in impact to that line. Because that was my introduction to wonder. I wanted everything to make sense. I wanted to rationalize everything. I wanted everything to be explainable, compartmentalized. So I had meaning, I had connection, and I had rationality. Dr. Block said, you don't have wonder. I feel something that you can only understand by feeling it. And he's like, you'll never feel it. Baruch Hashem, I feel it.
I think that a lot of people want to be a lot of things they want to wear a lot of hats. That's kind of the world that we live in. And what it seems to me, and from my own experience and from listening to you, is you have to do a deep dive if you want to have that wonder. You have to be immersed. You can't get wonder from trying to be everything to everyone.
Yeah, 100%. And what I liked about what the musicians taught me, see, Dr. Block didn't push me hard enough because he was a loving individual, right? But what these musicians taught me, and why I wanted to call the book Hope and Dissonance, is that dissonant music had an even more powerful impact. In other words, melodic music is nice. When you can sing along, it's nice. But what happens to music that doesn't follow normal chord progressions, that makes you feel weird inside, right? Music that you actually feel physically because it's so loud or it's so boisterous, right? And that's another degree of wonder. And what Nels always likes to say is, he said, the experience of dissonant music is important because he said, if everyone was comfortable with that feeling in a concert hall where it's safe, then they can be empowered to be comfortable with the uncomfortable outside. So he's like, come into my concert hall and I'm going to make some weird noises and play some chords and they're going to sound weird. You're going to be uncomfortable. And then in the end, you're going to be like, oh, I just felt something. I was through something. And then when you go out and your life is dissonant because there's difficulties, because there's sadness, because there's trials, maybe now you'll be better prepared to deal with it. You know, think of it from a cognitive behavioral point of view, right? Your brain has been trained to deal with the dissonance. I see someone noted they love Dave Matthews' concert. Pick up the last book. Jeff Kaufman from Dave Matthews is another one of the guides. We've got it covered.
There's so many questions coming in. I want to go through a couple of them before we go to the open Q&A.
Okay.
Somebody asks, there are so many things that one can do in this world. How do you choose to access meaning?
I think that for me, at least, it needs to be a process of experimentation. I think that if you start the journey thinking that you know where meaning is to be found, you're probably going in the wrong direction. I think that precisely because there are so many paths to meaning, I think you have to figure out what's right for you. I'll tell a story that my Rabbi shared, Rav Zalman Schachter Shalomi. It's a famous story that when he traveled to the Dalai Lama, he asked him, what should my mantra be? And the Dalai Lama laughed and he looked at him and he said, what are you asking me for? You have it. It's the Shema, right? It's yours. You know, don't come to me for the mantra that you need to meditate on to find meaning. It's yours, the Shema. And I think that that's a very powerful story because sometimes we think that within that experimental frame, we need to break our tradition or our box, right? We don't. But we do have to ask some questions and move out of our comfort zone to come back to it. So, you know, Rav Zalman said it was important for him to ask the Dalai Lama the question, and he was ecstatic with the answer, right? But I think the first step in finding meaning, so question, look, something that we talked about yesterday in the Clubhouse chat, right, is, you know, a religious person whose definition of God is the same today as an adult as it was when they were a child, didn't really go on a journey of meaning, okay? On the other hand, a person whose today definition of God lacks that feeling of childhood wonder, right? That they can't come back to that feeling, also missed the boat. So in other words, meaning needs to be that combination of experimenting. Don't necessarily sit comfortable in your frames, in your paradigms, but recognize that the journey can be iterative, that the journey can be circular, and maybe meaning is closer to home. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, it makes sense. And I think that it adds so much to who we are and really what we're trying to accomplish in our lives. Somebody else asks that they're so overwhelmed with all the information that's available, they can barely get through 400 emails a day. What are your suggestions? People are overwhelmed.
So that's a very practical question. That's a little off the topic here. But the short answer to that, and if any of my students are on this talk, they'll probably, you know, their blood pressure is going to boil when they hear me say this, because they'll have memories of this. Don't answer all the emails. Don't always respond. You know, limit yourself. You know, you can put in your email at the bottom, I only answer emails between 10 and 2 every other day. Expect 3 days before you hear back from me. You know, like manage it. Don't let it manage you. You know, one of another inspiring figure who I take a lot from is a guy by the name of Doug Rushkoff. And Doug Rushkoff said something, you know, so brilliant on that. He said that the biggest problem with technology is that we've moved to technological time. So rather than use technology as a tool that supports our rhythms, we're trying to adapt to its rhythm. And that's wrong. So he said, you know, in the early days of message boards, it was amazing. You'd log in, at dinner time. You'd write a question. Then 12 hours later, a guy in another time zone saw your question, thought about it, and answered it 10 hours later. So 2 days later, you log in, there's the answer, now you think about it, right? And so it was on human time. Now, machine time, boom, emails out. I got to respond now. No, you don't, because your brain doesn't work that way, So I think the short answer is manage it by privileging your humanity. And remember that it's a tool designed to help you. You're not supposed to be feeding it. It's supposed to be feeding you.
Well, if you can see, David, I added Rabbi Tzvi Freeman to our conversation. For those of you who don't know Rabbi Freeman, he's the author of the best-selling Bringing Heaven Down to Earth with many other books. He's a senior editor at Chabad.org. Rabbi Freeman, welcome.
Hi, just listening to David. It's nice to hear. Beautiful conversation going on. And I need that advice every once in a while to not answer my emails, although I don't answer most of them anyways. I think of the technology as being the snake in the garden. About the snake in the garden, originally the snake in the Garden of Eden was supposed to be an assistant for Adam and Eve. And that was good. It was a good assistant as long as it was as long as it was Adam and Eve giving the instructions and the snake following the instructions. But as soon as the snake started giving instructions and Adam and Eve were the ones listening, that's when the whole mess started. So, and the snake came back in the present, its incarnation, and what I'm holding in my hand right now while I'm talking to you. That's it. But David, really nice to see you and hear in the forum.
Rabbi Freeman is an amazing individual, and I hope you folks pull out his books. Rabbi Freeman has been the voice in my ear for many years now, saying, David, what you write is inaccessible. How can people read this? Where's the soul? And he's been saying it for 20 years, and I'm slowly getting better, but I'm not there yet. But his work has soul. His work has soul. So please. In fact, Rabbi Bernath and I were actually just talking today. Which one were we talking about? We
were talking about your
Heaven
book,
Exposed.
Heaven Exposed.
Heaven Exposed.
David you wrote the intro to that. Right?
I wrote the intro to it. Look that book up. No matter who you are, if you're into sci-fi, look it up. If you're into spirituality, if you like Alice in Wonderland, look it up. It's an amazing work. Amazing work.
It's just like that is the convergence of creativity and Jewish thought right there. I mean, that it's really an amazing book. I think it's David and I were saying earlier that it's one of those books that really hasn't seen enough exposure, and it needs to get more exposure.
Yeah, beautiful book.
Problem, they can't spell my name when they go into Amazon. That's the whole problem. Okay.
No, what happens is they just get to free, and then all this stuff shows up, right?
Okay, I get it. Yeah. I missed the talk about capitalism. I came in too late. I know you must have been talking about capitalism at some point, but I'm sure I missed that part.
David, before we go on, we're going to go on to an open Q&A in a minute. I just want to, because so many people have questions, and I'm going to ask the questions over there. And we're actually going to turn off the recording for our open Q&A. But I just what is your one thought that you want to leave with regards to connected capitalism, with regards to how to try to find this convergence of spirituality and work and bring them together? What's your final thought that you like to leave us with?
What I want to leave you with is, no matter what your faith tradition or no faith tradition at all, when you go out to work tomorrow or when you get back out there and try to change things, use spiritual language unashamedly, with courage, with conviction, and that's how you'll bring some change. No matter who you are, use spiritual language. So whether it's the Jewish language of mitzvah and kavrusa, whether it's more abstract spiritual language like love and connection, go out there and bring those words into spaces where they may be resistant. So if you work in an office where no one has ever said the word friendship as a work resource, right? No one said that, say it. right? Say we have a bunch of rare and valuable resources. We have cash, that's pretty valuable. We have intellectual property, that's pretty valuable. But we have something more than social capital, right? We have friendship. Say it. So if I can give you one takeaway, don't be shy about spiritual language. Don't be shy about using the language of mitzvah and chavrusa and love and compassion. Take it out into the professional world, into the political world, and that's how we'll rebuild after COVID in a meaningful way.
And kippah, take your kippah out with you.
Take your kippah out with you, yes.
Beautiful, Dave. You make a whole revolution of the economy just with that.
It's amazing. So everyone, this book is available on Amazon, Connected Capitalism. It's available on Chapters Indigo in Canada. It's available directly from the publishing house, University of Toronto Press. I love it. It was a great read, and definitely, if I can say, soul-filled, thought-provoking, and now we're going to go into our Q&A.